So what do you do when a headless server that you have, something without a mod or a keyboard, suddenly stops responding or refuses to boot? Well, if you're using enterprise-style server hardware, there's a good chance your system already includes something called IPMI, which stands for Intelligent Platform Management Interface. And the idea is pretty simple, even though it sounds a little bit complicated. It gives you remote control over the physical machine itself, even if the operating system crashes, the system freezes, or it otherwise isn't booting at all. So what IPMI allows you to do is from another computer, you can power the system that isn't responding on or off, access its BIOS, mount installation ISOs, and basically interact with the machine almost as if you're right in front of it with a monitor and a keyboard. The challenge is that a lot of consumer motherboards, mini PCs, and single board computers don't include these types of remote management features, and that's where IP-KVM devices come into play. IP-KVM stands for Keyboard, Video, and Mouse over IP, meaning these devices allow you to view and control another computer over your network, even at the BIOS or boot level. One of the more well-known examples is IPKVM, which is an open source project built around the Raspberry Pi that gives you low-level remote access to almost any computer by connecting to the system's video output and allowing you to remotely control the keyboard and mouse through a web interface. And that's what brings me to Jetkvm, which, yes, looks like a smartwatch, but actually is not. Now, unlike IPKVM, which is more of a sort of a DIY style, a Jetkvm is much more like a polished plug-and-play appliance. The idea is similar, but the setup process is extremely straightforward. In my case, I wanted to use it on this Zima board 2, which I use as my second Proxmox mode. Basically, you connect the Zima board's HDMI into the HDMI input, and you connect the USB for power and for keyboard and mouse into the Jetkvm's keyboard and mouse inputs here, and then you connect it to the RJ45 connection so you can connect it to your network. Once everything boots up, including the Jetkvm, it actually displays its IP address on the built-in screen. You can then type that address into a browser on another computer and access the Jetkvm's web interface, where you can remotely access, in this case, the Proxmox CLI on the Zima board 2, almost like you're physically in front of it. This obviously becomes incredibly useful once you start accumulating, or in my case, hoarding, a lot of computers, servers, whatnot in your home lab. Additionally, since Jetkvm works at the hardware level rather than relying on software inside the operating system, it works with pretty much anything like Windows, Linux, Mac OS, hypervisors like Proxmox, and even BIOS menus. And that's what makes devices like the Jetkvm so different from traditional desktop software. Tools like Remote Desktop on Windows, SSH, VNC, all still depend on the operating system being up and functioning, but KVM over IP devices work underneath the operating system itself at the hardware level. So even if the machine is frozen or won't boot, you can still interact with it remotely. And pricing is another big reason Jetkvm has been getting so much attention lately. Traditional IPKVM setups can get surprisingly expensive once you factor in the Raspberry Pi itself, expansion boards, adapters, storage, power supplies, and the enclosure, especially with the Raspberry Pi pricing fluctuating so much over the past few years. Even the official pre-assembled IPKVM units, that's my dog, are typically selling around $250 to $399 depending on model and the reseller. Meanwhile, the Jetkvm is currently sitting around $103. So if you're looking for something a little more practical, that's where it really comes into play. Now, normally the Jetkvm is designed for local network access, but if you want remote access from outside your home network, you can enable the Jetkvm Cloud with just a few clicks. To set it up, go to the Jetkvm settings, enable remote access, log in with a Google account, and then the device shows up in their cloud dashboard so you can access it remotely from anywhere. When outside your network, Jetkvm uses WebRTC for the remote connection, which actually is the same technology used for things like video conferencing. Jetkvm says the connection is encrypted end-to-end, and in most cases it tries to establish a direct peer-to-peer connection between your browser and the device. And if you don't want to use their cloud services at all, that's fine. They also support alternatives like Tailscale, or you can just use your own VPN setup instead. Another killer feature is Jetkvm's virtual media option, which allows you to either upload ISO files directly to the Jetkvm's onboard 16 gigabytes of storage, or use the newer URL mount option, which allows you to pull an ISO directly from a download link. With all of that said, the Jetkvm cannot turn your devices on or off without its optional DC power extension, which sits in line with the device's barrel jack adapter and allows the Jetkvm to remotely cut and restore power. Another thing I liked was the interface itself stayed pretty simple. Once I logged into the web UI, I could see the live video feed from the server, send keyboard input remotely, and even access things like the keyboard shortcuts directly through the browser. And because everything is browser-based, I didn't need to install any complicated client software on my machine. From a performance standpoint, I was actually pretty impressed with the responsiveness. No, I didn't feel like I was exactly in front of the machine with the monitor or mouse, but for BIOS navigation, Linux installs, troubleshooting, and general server management, it's surprisingly usable. Keyboard import felt responsive, the video quality was actually pretty serviceable, and the web interface itself was straightforward to navigate. One thing I also appreciate is that devices like the Jetkvm help bridge the gap between, your typical enterprise-style management and more typical Homelab hardware. For example, my Supermicron EPIC 3251 server motherboard has built-in IPMI support, but a lot of mini PCs, consumer motherboards, and some other Homelab systems simply don't include those types of remote management features. Devices like the Jetkvm bring a lot of that same functionality to the hardware that otherwise wouldn't have it. Now, realistically, not everybody and their uncle is going to need something like this. If you only got, one computer or one laptop, Jetkvm is probably overkill. But once you start building a Homelab at some point, you have multiple systems running like Proxmox, TrueNAS, Docker containers, virtual machines, and other what they call always-on services. Having some kind of low-level remote access is incredibly important and very, very useful. Anyway, that's going to wrap up another video, folks. If you found it useful, please give us a thumbs up and let me know your thoughts and feedback in the comments, including what, if any, IP-KVM device you might be using that's helped you avert disaster, or maybe at the very least saved you a trip from the server room. Also, make sure that you're subscribed to Mackie Tech if you haven't done so already. And if you'd like to support me, please consider joining my YouTube channel membership or visiting my Patreon, where I host a lot of my tutorials and some very exciting behind-the-scenes footage. A special shout out to my Patreon supporters. You know who you are. And thank you all for watching. We'll be talking to you again very soon.